In the deep blue, where sunlight fades and shadows move with purpose, predators patrol with ancient precision. Sharks, built for speed, stealth, and power, can turn calm waters into chaos in an instant. Whether it's a curious approach or a full-speed strike, encounters with these apex hunters often leave no room for second chances. In this video, we'll dive into some of the most shocking shark attacks ever documented, from a live broadcast turned bloodbath to a fishing boat capsized by a great white, moments where fear, courage, and survival collided. The coastal waters off Gansbaai, South Africa, had earned their reputation as one of the world's premier great white shark territories by July 2025. This small fishing town, situated roughly 2 hours southeast of Cape Town, sits at the convergence of two major ocean currents, creating an ecosystem rich in seals and other marine life that draws massive predators from the depths. The area had become known internationally as Shark Alley, a stretch of water between Dyer Island and Geyser Rock, where great whites patrol year-round in search of their preferred prey. Russian marine journalist Natalia Orlova had traveled to this notorious location specifically to document great white behavior for her nature documentary series. At 34 years old, Natalia had built a reputation for fearless reporting, often placing herself in dangerous situations to capture compelling footage of apex predators. Her previous work had taken her into crocodile-infested swamps in Botswana and polar bear territories in the Arctic. But she had never encountered anything quite like the great whites of South Africa. The research vessel Natalia had chartered was a sturdy 30-foot boat equipped with specialized shark viewing platforms and underwater cameras. Her crew consisted of local marine biologist Dr. Hendrik Voss, boat captain Willem Strauss, and cameraman Dmitry Petrov, who had accompanied her from Moscow. The plan was straightforward: position the vessel over known feeding grounds, deploy a chum slick to attract sharks, and film their natural hunting behaviors while Natalia provided live commentary for viewers back in Russia. The morning of July 4th dawned clear and calm, with minimal wind creating ideal conditions for filming. Captain Strauss had positioned the vessel approximately 3 miles offshore, where the continental shelf dropped sharply into deeper water. The crew had been chumming for nearly an hour when the first dorsal fin appeared in the distance. Natalia felt her pulse quicken as she began her live broadcast, describing the approaching predator to thousands of viewers tuning into her popular wildlife program. What started as a routine filming session quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. The initial shark, a respectable 12-footer, was soon joined by 2 others, then 3 more. Within minutes, the boat was surrounded by massive great whites, their triangular fins cutting through the surface as they investigated the source of the enticing scent trail. Dr. Voss observed that this level of activity was unusual, even for Gansbaai waters, suggesting the sharks had been feeding heavily on a nearby seal colony. Natalia positioned herself at the boat's port rail, leaning forward to get optimal camera angles while maintaining her running commentary. She described the sharks' movements with scientific precision, noting their estimated sizes and behavioral patterns. The largest specimen, which she estimated at close to 18 feet, had been circling the boat for several minutes, occasionally bumping the hull with its snout in exploratory fashion. The attack happened with terrifying suddenness. As Natalia leaned further over the rail to film the massive shark directly below the boat, the predator launched itself from the water with explosive force. Great whites are capable of breaching completely clear of the surface when attacking seals, and this particular individual demonstrated that remarkable ability as it exploded upward with its jaws agape. The shark's momentum carried it partially onto the boat's deck, its massive head and shoulders crashing down mere inches from where Natalia stood. In the chaos of the moment, the predator's jaws snapped shut on her left forearm, the razor-sharp teeth penetrating deep into muscle and scraping against bone. The force of the bite was estimated later by medical professionals to exceed 4,000 pounds per square inch. Natalia's screams pierced the air as the shark's weight threatened to drag her overboard. The predator thrashed violently, its powerful tail slapping against the deck as it tried to return to the water with its prize. Captain Strauss immediately cut the engines and rushed to help, while Dr. Voss grabbed a boat hook to try prying the shark's jaws open. Dmitry continued filming throughout the attack, capturing footage that would later become some of the most dramatic shark encounter material ever recorded. The live broadcast signal, however, cut out moments after the initial strike, leaving viewers in Russia staring at blank screens and wondering about Natalia's fate. The crew's rescue efforts were hampered by the shark's immense size and strength. Each thrash of its powerful body threatened to tear Natalia's arm apart or pull her into the water where other sharks continued to circle. Captain Strauss managed to grab Natalia around the waist while Dr. Voss struck the shark repeatedly with the boat hook, focusing on its sensitive snout area. After what felt like an eternity but lasted only 30 seconds, the great white released its grip and slid back into the ocean. Natalia collapsed onto the deck, her arm mangled but still attached. Blood poured from multiple puncture wounds where the shark's teeth had penetrated, and Dr. Voss immediately applied pressure bandages while Captain Strauss radioed for emergency medical assistance. The race to shore became a desperate battle against time and blood loss. Captain Strauss pushed the vessel to its maximum speed, while Dr. Voss worked to stabilize Natalia's injuries using the boat's first aid supplies. Natalia remained conscious throughout the journey, even managing to provide a weak but coherent account of the attack for Dmitri's camera. Emergency medical teams were waiting at the Gansbai harbor when the vessel arrived. Natalia was immediately airlifted to a trauma center in Cape Town, where surgeons worked for 6 hours to repair the extensive damage to her arm. Miraculously, no major arteries had been severed. And while she would require months of physical therapy, doctors expected her to make a full recovery. The incident sparked intense debate about safety protocols for wildlife filmmakers working with dangerous marine predators. Natalia later stated that despite her injuries, the experience had only deepened her respect for great whites and her commitment to documenting their behavior, though she admitted future filming would involve more cautious positioning relative to the water's edge. The pristine waters off Vilanculos, Mozambique, had attracted adventure seekers for decades by 2019. This coastal town, situated along the country's eastern shoreline where the Mozambique Channel meets pristine coral reefs, was renowned for its abundant marine life and crystal-clear waters. The area served as a gateway to the nearby archipelago, where flamingo colonies nested on remote sandbars and dugongs grazed in shallow seagrass beds. However, beneath the surface, beauty lurked dangers that few tourists fully understood. The confluence of the Govoro River with the Indian Ocean created a unique ecosystem where bull sharks thrived. These apex predators, capable of surviving in both saltwater and freshwater environments, regularly patrolled the murky waters where the river met the sea. Local fishing communities had long respected these powerful hunters, referring to them as river bulls, and avoiding certain areas during peak feeding times. 29-year-old French traveler Luc Martin had arrived in Vilanculos 3 days earlier as part of a month-long African adventure. An experienced kayaker from the Loire Valley, Luc had paddled rivers across Europe, but had never encountered the unique challenges of tropical coastal waters. He had rented a bright yellow sea kayak from a local outfitter, eager to explore the remote sandbars where thousands of flamingos gathered during the dry season. Luc's traveling companions, fellow French tourists Margot Dubois and Jean-Claude Remy, had opted to remain on the beach that morning, preferring to photograph the flamingos from a distance rather than venture into the water. They watched from the shoreline as Luc paddled confidently toward a small sandbar roughly half a mile offshore, his yellow kayak cutting through the gentle morning swells. The dawn light painted the water in shades of gold and turquoise as Luc approached the reef barrier that separated the shallow lagoon from deeper ocean waters. Hundreds of flamingos stood in the distance, their pink plumage creating a striking contrast against the white sand. Luc paused frequently to take photographs, completely absorbed in the spectacular scene unfolding around him. What Luc could not see was the turbid plume of river water that extended far beyond the visible coastline. Recent rains had swollen the Govoro River, carrying sediment and nutrients that attracted schools of small fish. These bait fish, in turn, had drawn larger predators into the area, including several bull sharks that had been hunting in the murky water since before sunrise. As Luc drifted past the reef edge, he unknowingly entered the territory that local fishermen typically avoided during early morning hours. The water beneath his kayak dropped from 6 feet to over 30 feet, and the clarity that characterized the inner lagoon gave way to the darker, sediment-laden water from the river system. The attack came without warning, A massive bull shark, estimated later by marine biologists to exceed 11 feet in length, erupted from the depths with devastating force. The predator struck the kayak's hull with such violence that Luke was launched into the air before crashing into the water several yards away. The impact split the fiberglass kayak nearly in half, leaving debris scattered across the surface. Margot and Jean-Claude witnessed the explosion of water and foam from their position on the beach. Initially, they assumed Luke had simply capsized in the surf, but their relief turned to horror as they realized the true nature of what they were witnessing. The bull shark's massive dorsal fin was clearly visible as it circled the area where Luke struggled to stay afloat. Luke surfaced once, his voice carrying across the water as he screamed for help. The shark struck again with terrifying precision, its powerful jaws clamping down on Luke's torso with bone-crushing force. The predator's roll, a feeding behavior characteristic of bull sharks, created a violent whirlpool of blood and foam before both shark and victim disappeared beneath the surface. The overturned remains of the yellow kayak continued to drift toward shore, bearing deep gouges and bite marks that told the story of the violent encounter. Several local fishermen in traditional dhows had witnessed the attack from a distance and immediately began searching the area. But the murky water made underwater visibility nearly impossible. Jean-Claude and Margot frantically contacted local authorities, who launched a comprehensive search and rescue operation within hours. Teams of divers combed the area for 3 days, but the strong currents and poor visibility hampered their efforts. On the second day, searchers recovered fragments of Luke's wetsuit and camera equipment, but no trace of his body was ever found. Local marine biologist Dr. Carlos Nunes later explained that bull sharks in the area were particularly aggressive during the rainy season when river runoff created ideal hunting conditions. The murky water allowed them to ambush prey more effectively, and the abundance of nutrients supported larger populations of both predators and prey species. The tragedy deeply affected the local tourism community, which had previously considered the waters around Vilanculos relatively safe for recreational activities. New safety protocols were implemented, including mandatory briefings about bull shark behavior and restrictions on solo kayaking beyond the reef barrier. Margot and Jean-Claude remained in Mozambique for 2 weeks, hoping against hope that Luke might somehow be found alive. They eventually returned to France, carrying with them not only grief, but also a profound respect for the power and unpredictability of the ocean. The incident served as a stark reminder that even the most beautiful tropical waters can harbor deadly predators, and that paradise often comes with hidden dangers that demand respect and caution. The golden beaches of Durban, South Africa, had been synonymous with surf culture and beach safety since the 1960s. When the city established one of the world's first professional lifeguard services in 2022. This coastal metropolis, situated along the warm waters of the Indian Ocean in KwaZulu-Natal province, attracted millions of visitors annually to its expansive shoreline. The city's beaches stretched for miles, protected by an extensive shark net system, and patrolled by highly trained lifeguards who had earned international recognition for their rescue capabilities. The warm Agulhas current that flows along South Africa's east coast creates ideal conditions for both beach recreation and marine predators. Bronze whaler sharks, also known as copper sharks, were regular visitors to these waters, particularly during the sardine run when massive schools of fish migrated northward along the coast. These powerful predators, typically measuring 8 to 10 feet in length, were known for their aggressive feeding behavior and tendency to venture into shallow water when pursuing prey. Sefo Mthembu had been working as a professional lifeguard for 8 years, during which time he had completed over 200 rescues without serious incident. The 26-year-old from nearby Pinetown had grown up swimming in these waters and possessed an intimate understanding of local current patterns and marine life. His colleagues regarded him as one of the most capable swimmers on the beach patrol team, equally comfortable in massive surf or calm conditions. The morning of March 15th brought challenging conditions to the central Durban beachfront. A powerful low-pressure system offshore had generated substantial swells, creating dangerous rip currents that caught several inexperienced swimmers off guard. The red warning flags indicated hazardous conditions, but tourists and locals alike continued to enter the water, requiring constant vigilance from the lifeguard teams. Around 11 o'clock, Sifo spotted a middle-aged woman struggling in a powerful rip current, approximately 100 meters from shore. The current was pulling her steadily away from the beach toward deeper water, and despite her frantic efforts to swim back to shore, she was rapidly losing strength. Sifo immediately grabbed his rescue board and paddled hard through the turbulent surf, fighting against the same current that had trapped the swimmer. What neither Sifo nor the struggling swimmer could see was the large bronze whaler shark that had been hunting in the area since dawn. The predator had been attracted by schools of sardines that were being pushed toward shore by the same weather system, creating the dangerous surf conditions. The murky water, stirred up by the powerful waves, provided perfect cover for the shark as it patrolled the area where the rip current created an underwater feeding zone. As Sifo reached the drowning woman, he executed a textbook rescue technique, positioning his board between himself and the victim while extending his arm to pull her to safety. The woman, later identified as tourist Linda Kowalski from Poland, was exhausted and panicked, making the rescue more challenging than usual. Sifo maintained his calm demeanor, speaking reassuringly while securing her grip on the rescue board. The bronze whale struck at that precise moment, erupting from the murky water with its jaws agape. The shark, measuring approximately 9 feet in length, had likely mistaken the thrashing movements and vibrations for those of a wounded fish. Its powerful jaws clamped down on Sifo's extended forearm instead of the intended target, the crushing bite penetrating deep into muscle and scraping against bone. The searing pain that shot through Sifo's arm was unlike anything he had experienced, but his training and instincts took over. Rather than panicking, he immediately began striking the shark's snout with his free hand, delivering powerful blows to one of the predator's most sensitive areas. The bronze whale thrashed violently, its powerful body creating a whirlpool of blood and foam around the rescue board. Linda Kowalski watched in terror as the shark's bronze-colored body writhed just inches from her position on the board. The predator's tail slapped the water with tremendous force, and she could see its black eyes and rows of razor-sharp teeth as it maintained its grip on Sifo's arm. The lifeguard continued his counterattack, focusing his strikes on the shark's gills and eye area while fighting to remain conscious, despite the excruciating pain. After what seemed like an eternity but lasted only 20 seconds, the bronze whaler released its grip and disappeared into the turbulent water. Sifo's forearm was severely mangled, with deep puncture wounds marking where the shark's teeth had penetrated, but the main arteries remained intact. Blood clouded the water around the rescue board as he struggled to maintain his grip while simultaneously supporting the shocked tourist. Other lifeguards had witnessed the attack from shore and immediately launched additional rescue craft. The beach's emergency medical team was already mobilizing as Sifo began the difficult journey back to shore, using one arm to paddle while keeping Linda secure on the board. Despite his injuries, he maintained communication with his victim, ensuring she remained calm during the harrowing trip through the continuing surf. Emergency medical technicians were waiting as Sifo reached the beach, and he was immediately transported to a nearby hospital, where surgeons worked to repair the extensive damage to his forearm. The attack had severed several tendons and damaged muscle tissue, but quick medical intervention prevented permanent disability. Linda Kowalski was treated for shock and exhaustion, but suffered no physical injuries from the encounter. The incident sent shockwaves through the international lifeguarding community and prompted immediate reviews of rescue protocols in predator-rich waters. Marine biologists noted that bronze whaler sharks typically avoided human contact, suggesting that environmental conditions and prey availability had created an unusual situation where the shark's normal behavior patterns were disrupted. Sifo returned to lifeguard duty 6 months later, after extensive physical therapy and psychological counseling. His heroic actions during the attack had saved Linda Kowalski's life, earning him recognition from international rescue organizations. The experience, however, had profoundly changed his approach to ocean rescues, and he became an advocate for improved shark detection technology and enhanced safety protocols for beach patrol teams operating in predator-heavy waters. The rugged coastline of Queensland, Australia, had become a mecca for extreme sports enthusiasts by 2021, particularly the remote coves north of Cairns, where towering cliffs provided perfect launching points for adrenaline seekers. They featured pristine waters and dramatic limestone formations that drew cliff divers from across the globe. Its remote location and crystal-clear waters made it ideal for those seeking to push the limits of their sport away from crowds and regulations. The tropical waters along this section of Queensland's coast were also home to numerous tiger sharks, apex predators known for their opportunistic hunting behavior and willingness to investigate unusual disturbances in their territory. These massive sharks, which could exceed 14 feet in length, were particularly active during the warmer months when their preferred prey species were most abundant in the shallow reef systems. Mark Reynolds had built his reputation as one of Australia's most daring cliff divers, over a decade of increasingly spectacular stunts. The 32-year-old from Brisbane had performed jumps across 4 continents, always seeking more challenging locations and greater heights. His social media following had grown substantially after several viral videos showcasing his death-defying leaps, and corporate sponsors were beginning to take notice of his unique brand of extreme athletics. For his latest project, Mark had scouted a remote cove accessible only by boat or hiking trail, where 30-foot cliffs offered the perfect platform for a spectacular dive. The location was technically within protected marine park boundaries, but its isolation meant that enforcement was minimal, and the likelihood of interference was virtually zero. Mark's support team consisted of photographer Jake Morrison and safety diver Rebecca Chen, both experienced in documenting extreme sports activities. The morning of August 12th provided ideal conditions for the stunt. Calm seas and excellent underwater visibility would ensure that Jake could capture high-quality footage both above and below the surface. Rebecca had already completed several reconnaissance dives to check for underwater obstacles and confirmed that the depth was adequate for such a high-impact entry. The water was crystal clear to a depth of 40 feet, with a sandy bottom that would provide a safe landing zone. What the team had not considered was the presence of a large female tiger shark that had been hunting in the area since before dawn. The predator, measuring approximately 13 feet in length, had been attracted to the cove by schools of trevally that often fed on smaller fish around the coral outcroppings. Tiger sharks are known for their curiosity about unusual objects or disturbances in their environment, and the shark had been investigating the unfamiliar sounds of human activity from the surface. Mark positioned himself at the cliff edge, taking several deep breaths as he prepared for the dive. The technique required perfect timing and body positioning to ensure a clean entry that would minimize impact forces and maximize the visual spectacle. Jake had positioned himself on a lower ledge to capture the full arc of the dive, while Rebecca floated in the water below to provide safety support if needed. The dive itself was flawless. Mark's 30-foot plunge created a spectacular splash as he hit the water with textbook form, penetrating deep beneath the surface before beginning his ascent back toward daylight. The impact and sudden movement, however, had triggered an immediate response from the tiger shark, which interpreted the disturbance as potential prey activity. As Mark surfaced and began treading water while catching his breath, the massive tiger shark approached from below with surprising speed. Tiger sharks are ambush predators, capable of sudden bursts of acceleration when attacking, and this individual demonstrated that capability as it surged upward from the depths. The shark's powerful jaws clamped down on Mark's lower right leg with devastating force, the crushing bite penetrating through muscle and scraping against bone. The sudden pain was excruciating, but Mark's years of extreme sports experience had taught him to function under pressure. Rather than panicking, he immediately began fighting back, delivering powerful punches to the shark's snout and attempting to gouge its eyes. Tiger sharks have thick, leathery skin that provides substantial protection, but the sensitive areas around the eyes and gills remain vulnerable to determined counterattacks. Rebecca Chen witnessed the attack from less than 20 meters away and immediately swam toward the struggle, armed with a diving knife that she hoped might help drive off the predator. The tiger shark thrashed violently as Mark continued his desperate defense, its powerful tail creating massive splashes that could be heard from the clifftop, where Jake continued filming the terrifying encounter. The shark's grip loosened after approximately 30 seconds of continuous fighting, but not before inflicting severe lacerations on Mark's calf and ankle. As the predator released its hold and began to circle at a distance, Rebecca reached Mark and helped support him as he struggled to remain conscious from pain and blood loss. The water around them was rapidly turning red, creating additional concern about attracting other predators to the area. Jake Morrison rappelled down the cliff face and entered the water to assist with the rescue, bringing a first aid kit and emergency flotation devices. The team worked together to apply pressure bandages to Mark's injuries while helping him swim toward a small beach where they had left their inflatable boat. The tiger shark continued to patrol the area but maintained its distance as the group slowly made their way to safety. The boat ride back to the nearest medical facility took nearly an hour, during which Mark remained conscious but required constant attention to prevent excessive blood loss. Emergency medical teams were waiting at the marina in Cairns, and Mark was immediately transported to the hospital, where surgeons spent 4 hours repairing the damage to his lower leg. The attack had severed several tendons and damaged muscle tissue, but quick medical intervention prevented permanent disability. The incident garnered significant media attention and sparked debate about the wisdom of performing extreme stunts in predator-rich waters. Marine biologists noted that tiger sharks were naturally curious about unusual disturbances, and that cliff diving in their habitat inevitably carried substantial risks. Mark eventually made a full recovery and returned to cliff diving, though he acknowledged that the experience had given him a deeper respect for the ocean's apex predators and the importance of understanding their behavior before entering their domain. The waters off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, had earned the nickname Graveyard of the Atlantic by 2020, with over 5,000 documented shipwrecks scattered along the treacherous coastline, where the warm Gulf Stream meets the cold Labrador Current. This convergence of opposing water masses created challenging conditions for maritime navigation, but also established one of the world's premier wreck diving destinations. The area attracted technical divers from across North America, who came to explore vessels that had met their fate in these turbulent waters over several centuries. Among the most famous wrecks in the region was the merchant vessel SS Carolina, which had sunk during a 1942 German U-boat attack approximately 12 miles offshore. The 380-foot cargo ship now rested in 80 feet of water, its broken hull providing habitat for an incredible diversity of marine life. The wreck had become particularly famous among underwater photographers for the large sand tiger sharks that frequently sheltered within its shadowy compartments. Sand tiger sharks were generally considered among the more docile species encountered by recreational divers. These imposing predators, despite their fearsome appearance with protruding teeth and powerful builds, typically demonstrated little aggression toward humans. Their presence around shipwrecks was well documented, as the structures provided ideal hunting grounds for the smaller fish species that comprised their primary diet. Most dive operators in the area considered sand tigers to be relatively safe encounters that added excitement to wreck exploration without significant risk. Tom Delgado had been diving the Carolina wreck for over 15 years, making it one of his most familiar underwater destinations. The 41-year-old marine contractor from Virginia Beach possessed advanced technical diving certifications and had logged thousands of hours exploring East Coast shipwrecks. His expertise with complex dive planning and emergency procedures had made him a sought-after guide for visiting divers who wanted to explore the more challenging wrecks in the area. On the afternoon of August 23rd, Tom was conducting a routine survey dive to assess structural changes in the wreck's forward section. Recent storms had shifted sediment around the vessel, potentially exposing new areas for exploration while possibly destabilizing other sections. His dive partner was marine archaeologist Dr. Patricia Hayes, who was documenting artifacts for a research project focused on World War II-era cargo vessels. The dive began normally, with excellent visibility extending to nearly 60 feet in the clear Gulf Stream water. Tom and Dr. Hayes descended along the anchor line, following standard protocols for wreck penetration diving. Both divers carried multiple light sources and emergency air supplies, adhering to the safety standards that had kept them incident-free throughout their diving careers. As they approached the wreck's cargo hold, Tom noticed several sand tiger sharks resting in their typical motionless hover near the vessel's superstructure. The sharks appeared completely relaxed, displaying none of the agitated behavior that might indicate territorial aggression or feeding activity. Dr. Hayes began photographing the marine growth on the wreck's hull while Tom proceeded toward an opening in the cargo compartment. that had been exposed by recent sediment shifts. The attack occurred as Tom was examining twisted metal debris near the hold's entrance. A massive sand tiger shark, significantly larger than the specimens typically encountered at the site, emerged from the shadows within the wreck's interior. The predator, later estimated at over 10 feet in length, struck with sudden violence that contradicted everything Tom knew about sand tiger behavior. The shark's jaws clamped down on Tom's lower left leg just above the ankle, the crushing bite penetrating through his thick wetsuit and into the muscle beneath. The force of the attack drove Tom backward against the wreck's jagged hull, scraping his equipment against corroded metal as the shark thrashed in an attempt to secure its grip. Tom's regulator was knocked from his mouth, and his mask flooded as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. Training and experience took over as Tom fought against both panic and pain. He immediately began striking the shark's snout and eye area, while attempting to retrieve his backup regulator and clear his mask. The sand tiger's powerful body movements created a cloud of sediment that reduced visibility to zero, making it impossible for him to see the extent of his injuries or locate his dive partner. Dr. Hayes had witnessed the initial attack and immediately swam toward the struggle, her own heart rate spiking as she processed the unprecedented nature of what she was seeing. Sand tiger sharks simply did not behave this aggressively, and the attack seemed to contradict decades of established behavioral patterns. She activated her emergency signaling device while approaching the thrashing figures locked in combat near the wreck's hull. The shark maintained its grip for nearly a minute before Tom's desperate fighting finally convinced it to release its hold. As the predator disappeared back into the wreck's interior, Tom found himself struggling to remain conscious while blood clouded the water around his injured leg. The puncture wounds were deep and numerous, marking where the shark's needle-like teeth had penetrated, but the thick neoprene of his wetsuit had provided some protection against the worst damage. Dr. Hayes immediately assisted Tom in beginning their emergency ascent, carefully monitoring their decompression requirements, while simultaneously trying to assess the severity of his injuries. The dive had been conducted at depths requiring staged decompression, meaning that a rapid ascent to the surface would risk potentially fatal decompression sickness. They were forced to balance the urgent need for medical attention against the physiological demands of safe ascent procedures. The decompression stops felt endless as Tom fought to stay conscious and control his bleeding. Dr. Hayes applied pressure to the wounds while constantly monitoring Tom's condition for signs of shock or blood loss that might require abandoning proper decompression protocols. Their emergency signals had been received by the surface support team, which immediately began preparing for a medical emergency. Upon reaching the surface, Tom was quickly transferred to the dive boat, where emergency medical technicians began treating his injuries. The shark's teeth had created multiple deep lacerations and puncture wounds, but miraculously no major arteries had been severed. Tom was airlifted to a trauma center in Norfolk, where surgeons spent several hours cleaning and suturing the wounds while treating him for blood loss and shock. The attack puzzled marine biologists familiar with sand tiger shark behavior, as such aggressive encounters were virtually unprecedented. Later investigation revealed that the particular shark involved may have been defending a feeding site or territory within the wreck, behavior that was extremely unusual for the species. The incident led to revised safety protocols for wreck diving operations, emphasizing that even typically docile shark species could become unpredictable under certain circumstances. Tom recovered fully from his injuries after several months of physical therapy, though the experience had permanently changed his perspective on marine predator encounters. He eventually returned to wreck diving, but maintained much greater awareness of shark behavior and positioning during his underwater explorations. The waters off the western Cape of South Africa had supported commercial fishing operations for over 3 centuries by 2018, with generations of families depending on the rich marine resources found where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans converge. The continental shelf in this region created ideal conditions for both commercial and subsistence fishing, supporting massive schools of sardines, anchovies, and other species that form the foundation of the local economy. However, these same productive waters also attracted some of the ocean's most formidable predators. The coastal town of Hermanus had become internationally famous for its whale-watching opportunities, but local fishing families knew the waters held dangers that tourists rarely considered. great white sharks patrolled these waters year-round, drawn by abundant seal colonies and the seasonal sardine migrations that brought massive feeding opportunities close to shore. The sharks in this region were known for their exceptional size and aggressive behavior, particularly during feeding frenzies when competition for food reached peak intensity. Peter van der Merwe had been fishing these waters for over 20 years, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, who had made their living from the sea since the early 1900s. His boat, the 30-foot Susanna Maria, was a sturdy vessel designed for the challenging conditions of the South African coast. The 43-year-old fisherman had survived numerous storms and equipment failures, but had never encountered anything that truly challenged his confidence in his ability to handle whatever the ocean might present. His crew consisted of his younger brother Johan and longtime friend Cornelius Bester, both experienced fishermen who had been working together for over a decade. The three men operated as a tight unit, each understanding his role in the complex choreography of commercial fishing operations. Their target species were lionfish and small tuna that commanded good prices at the local markets, providing a modest but steady income for their families. The morning of September 4th brought ideal fishing conditions, with calm seas and clear skies that promised a productive day on the water. The crew had departed Hermanus Harbor before dawn, heading for fishing grounds approximately 8 miles offshore, where recent reports indicated good catches of yellowtail and snook. Their fish finder showed promising signs of activity as they approached the fishing zone, with large schools of baitfish creating dense clouds on the sonar display. What the electronic equipment could not detect was the presence of several massive great white sharks that had been hunting in the area since the previous evening. A dead whale calf had been discovered drifting in the current several miles away, attracting multiple predators to the region. The feeding activity had created an aggressive competitive atmosphere among the sharks, heightening their willingness to investigate any potential food source. Peter had been hauling in nets filled with sardines when the first great white appeared alongside the boat. The shark, estimated at over 16 feet in length, initially seemed content to investigate the activity without showing aggressive behavior. The crew had encountered sharks before and followed standard protocols, continuing their work while maintaining awareness of the predator's position. The situation escalated rapidly when additional sharks arrived, drawn by both the scent of the captured fish and the feeding activity of the first predator. Within minutes, the boat was surrounded by at least 4 massive great whites, their dorsal fins cutting through the surface as they circled with increasing agitation. The water around the vessel began to churn as the sharks competed for position, their powerful movements creating turbulence that rocked the fishing boat. The attack came from below with devastating suddenness. The largest shark, a massive female estimated at nearly 18 feet, struck the boat's hull with tremendous force, lifting the bow partially out of the water. The impact was so violent that it cracked the fiberglass hull and sent all 3 crew members tumbling across the deck. Before they could regain their footing, the shark struck again, this time targeting the boat's stern with such power that the vessel capsized. Peter found himself struggling in the icy Atlantic water, surrounded by debris from his destroyed boat and the continued presence of multiple great white sharks. The predators seemed frenzied by the chaos and the scent of fish blood that had spilled from the ruptured cargo holds. One of the sharks made a pass at Peter's legs, its jaws snapping shut just inches from his struggling form as he desperately tried to reach a floating piece of debris. Johan had managed to grab onto an overturned section of the hull, but Cornelius was struggling to stay afloat while dealing with a deep gash on his forehead from the capsizing. The sharks continued to circle aggressively, their behavior more violent than anything the fishermen had previously witnessed. Peter kicked frantically as one of the predators approached from below, feeling the shark's rough skin scrape against his leg before it veered away. The largest female made another pass at the struggling fisherman, her jaws clamping down on Peter's lower right leg with bone-crushing force. The serrated teeth penetrated deep into muscle tissue, while the shark's powerful neck muscles applied tremendous pressure. Peter felt his consciousness wavering from the excruciating pain, but managed to strike the predator's eye area with his fist, causing it to release its grip and retreat momentarily. Blood from Peter's injuries was creating an expanding crimson cloud in the water, further exciting the remaining sharks and increasing the danger for all 3 men. Johann and Cornelius struggled to reach their injured colleague, while simultaneously watching for additional attacks. The situation seemed hopeless until the sound of approaching boat engines indicated that help might be arriving. A nearby fishing vessel had witnessed the attack through binoculars and immediately altered course to provide assistance. The rescue boat's crew used boat hooks and rescue lines to pull the 3 fishermen from the water, while simultaneously working to drive off the sharks with noise and movement. Peter was barely conscious from blood loss and shock as he was hauled aboard the rescue vessel, his leg bearing multiple deep puncture wounds that required immediate medical attention. The race to shore became a desperate fight against time, as Peter's condition deteriorated during the journey. The rescue boat's crew applied pressure bandages and administered basic first aid while maintaining radio contact with emergency medical services waiting at Hermanus Harbor. Peter remained conscious throughout the trip, though he was clearly in severe shock from his injuries and the traumatic experience. Emergency medical teams were prepared when the rescue boat reached harbor, and Peter was immediately transported to a trauma center where surgeons worked to repair the extensive damage to his leg. The great white's teeth had created multiple lacerations and puncture wounds, but prompt medical intervention prevented permanent disability. Johann and Cornelius were treated for hypothermia and minor injuries, but made full recoveries. The incident highlighted the increasing aggression of great white sharks in the region, possibly due to declining food sources and increased competition among predators. Marine biologists noted that such direct attacks on vessels were extremely rare, but not unprecedented when sharks were in heightened feeding states. The destruction of the Susanna Maria represented a significant financial loss for Peter's family, but the survival of all 3 crew members was considered miraculous given the circumstances of the attack.